Have you ever walked through a car show and noticed how every other car is a Camaro, a Mustang, or a Charger? Nothing wrong with those rides, but what about the muscle cars that slipped through the cracks? The ones that had the horsepower, the looks, and the attitude, but somehow got left behind by history. Well, today we are counting down 20 forgotten muscle cars from the 1970s that we desperately want back. Some of these will shock you. Some of these you may have never even heard of. So buckle up, hit that like button, subscribe if you have not already, and let us get into it. Number 20, 1971. Plymouth GTX 440 plus 6. If you were shopping for a Mopar in 1971, chances are you walked right past the GTX and went straight for the Roadrunner or the Cuda. And honestly, that is exactly why the GTX ended up forgotten. It was the upscale sibling, the one with the bucket seats, the nicer trim, the plush interior. But underneath all that refinement was pure violence. The 440 plus 6 barrel setup was rated at 390 horsepower. With the right driver, it could dip into the low 13s in the quarter mile, brushing against high 12-second territory. That put it right in the conversation with the most elite muscle cars of the era. Plymouth only moved about 2,900 GTXs that year. Of those, just around 326 came equipped with the 440 plus 6 and a 4-speed manual, making it one of the rarest configurations from any major nameplate. It had wide hips, flared fenders, and the optional air grabber hood that popped open under throttle. Aggressive, but never obnoxious. Today, the GTX is finally getting the recognition it deserves among serious Mopar collectors. Number 19, 1973. Chevrolet Chevelle Laguna S3. By 1973, most enthusiasts had given up on the Chevelle. The glory days of the SS 454 were fading, and the new Laguna trim confused everybody. Was it a luxury car? Was it a muscle car? The answer was both. And that identity crisis is exactly why collectors ignored it for decades. But here is the thing. Chevelle Lagunas could still be ordered with the 454 big block V8, producing 245 horsepower. Sure, that number sounds modest compared to the late 60s monsters, but remember, this was the era of the energy crisis. Most competitors had already ditched their big blocks entirely. The Laguna also had something its predecessors lacked, a color-keyed urethane front fascia that looked genuinely futuristic for the time, disc brakes up front, and a chassis tuned for actual handling. You could get a 454 Laguna for surprisingly little money at auction, even today. A true big block muscle car that almost nobody remembers. Number 18, 1971. AMC Javelin AMX 401. American Motors Corporation never had the budget, the dealer network, or the marketing muscle of the big three. But what they had was audacity. The 1971 Javelin AMX was AMC's last true muscle car, and it was a beast. The 401 cubic inch V8 cranked out 330 horsepower and 430 pound-feet of torque. In Trans Am racing, the Javelin dominated, winning 8 out of 10 races in the 1971 season with Mark Donohue behind the wheel. AMC only built about 2,054 AMX units that year, and just 745 of those came with the big 401 engine. The second-generation Javelin had wildly flared fender arches designed to accommodate oversized racing tires, a fastback roofline, and an aggressive ducktail spoiler. It looked like nothing else on the road. Today, a decent 401 AMX can still be found for around $40,000, a fraction of what comparable Mopars command. It is arguably the greatest muscle car bargain left. Number 17, 1970. Mercury Cyclone Spoiler 429. While Ford got all the attention with the Torino Cobra, Mercury was quietly building its own weapon at Lincoln Mercury dealerships. The Cyclone spoiler came standard with the 370 horsepower 429 Cobra Jet V8, which was actually an upgrade that cost extra in the Ford. A Hurst-shifted 4-speed and 350-to-1 traction lock gears completed the package. Order the drag pack option, and you unlock the Super Cobra Jet, pushing 375 horses with solid lifters, stronger internals, and a Holley carburetor. The Cyclone spoiler could crack mid-13-second quarter miles, parking itself alongside GTO Judges and Boss 429s at the drag strip. Mercury only built 1,631 spoilers that year, with a mere 341 getting the Super Cobra Jet. 6 competition colors were available, plus a custom color program for buyers who wanted something unique. Inside, Mercury gave drivers a proper tachometer and full-gauge cluster, while the Torino made do with idiot lights. It was the better-equipped twin that nobody remembers. Number 16, 1970, Buick GS, 455 Stage 1, think 1970, GM muscle cars, and your mind goes straight to the Chevelle SS 454 LS6 or the Pontiac GTO Judge. But the Buick GS 455 Stage 1 was quietly the most devastating of them all. The Stage 1 package added high-flow cylinder heads, a hotter camshaft, and a specially tuned Quadrajet 4-barrel. The result was 360 horsepower and an absolutely staggering 510 pound-feet of torque, the most rotational force produced by any American car until the Dodge Viper came along decades later. Period tests from Motor Trend showed the GS 455 Stage 1 covering the quarter mile in 13.38 seconds at over 105 miles per hour. That was faster than many Hemi-powered Mopars in magazine testing. But Buick marketed it as a gentleman's muscle car, with plush bucket seats, wood grain trim, and a quiet exhaust. That sophistication killed its street cred and its legacy. Prices remain remarkably grounded compared to lesser GM muscle cars that simply had louder marketing. Number 15, 1971, Dodge Charger, Super B Hemi. The Super B started life on the Coronet platform as Dodge's budget muscle car answer to the Plymouth Roadrunner. But in 1971, the Coronet became a 4-door, and the Charger took over as Dodge's B-body offering. The problem was weight. The new Charger-based Super B tipped the scales at around 4,000 pounds. Insurance rates were through the roof, and the legendary 426 Hemi cost a fortune to option. So when the model year ended, exactly 22 people had bought a Hemi-powered Super B. 22? That is not a typo. Dodge immediately discontinued both the Super B nameplate and the Hemi engine. The name would not reappear until 2007. Today, those 22 surviving Hemi Super Bs are some of the rarest and most valuable American muscle cars in existence, valued at well over $200,000 each. It was the last gasp of a legendary combination that the market simply was not ready to support anymore. Number 14, 1971, Ford Ranchero, GT 429, Super Cobra Jet. Most people forget that the Ranchero was not just a work truck. In 1971, you could order one with Ford's 429 Super Cobra Jet, a purpose-built beast that produced 375 horsepower and 490 pound-feet of torque. This was the same engine powering Ford's most fearsome performance cars, now stuffed under the hood of something with a tailgate. The Ranchero GT could embarrass dedicated muscle cars at the drag strip and then haul your furniture home afterward. Ford first launched the Ranchero in 1957, 2 years before Chevrolet's El Camino. Yet the El Camino gets all the nostalgia today. The 429 Super Cobra Jet was not just a warmed-over V8 either. It had solid lifters, a forged crank, and internals designed for quarter-mile glory. Despite those credentials, almost nobody talks about it today. It was not a coupe, It was not a truck in the traditional sense, and it did not fit the muscle car mold that enthusiasts were used to. That weird identity is exactly why it remains one of Ford's most fascinating and overlooked performance builds. Number 13, 1970, Plymouth Sport Fury GT 446 pack. The Sport Fury GT was the largest muscle car Plymouth ever built, and arguably its most overlooked. This full-sized powerhouse came standard with a 318 V8, but the real magic happened when you checked the box for the 446 pack setup. With 3 two-barrel carburetors feeding that big block, you got 390 horsepower and 490 pound-feet of torque. It could hit 60 miles per hour in about 6.2 seconds and run the quarter mile in 14.7 seconds. Plymouth only produced around 66 Sport Fury GTs with the 6-pack for the United States market, with 3 additional units assembled in Canada. Today, only about 11 are known to still exist, and just 4 of those retain their original 446-barrel motor. The Sport Fury GT was part of Plymouth's Rapid Transit System marketing, connecting it to the company's NASCAR and drag racing programs. Despite being one of the rarest Mopars ever built, the original sticker price was only about $3,900. Today, a good one averages around $17,300, making it perhaps the most undervalued muscle car in existence. Number 12, 1972, Buick GSX. The GSX was always Buick's flashiest muscle car, a louder, bolder version of the Grand Sport with distinctive graphics and the division's most potent engines. But by 1972, the muscle car era was on life support. Emissions regulations were tightening, insurance companies were punishing performance car buyers, and horsepower numbers were dropping across the board. Buick still offered the GSX, but it was no longer a standalone model. Instead, it became an appearance package for the Grand Sport. Only 44 buyers stepped up for the 1972 GSX, making it one of the rarest production muscle cars of the entire decade. Power had dipped thanks to the switch from gross to net horsepower ratings and increasingly restrictive emissions controls. But the GSX still carried the distinctive styling touches that made it special, and with the aftermarket support available today, those original power numbers can easily be restored. Finding one is the hard part. With only 44 built, a documented 1972 GSX is a genuine unicorn that most collectors will never see in person. Number 11, 1970, AMC Rebel Machine. In 1970, American Motors looked at the muscle car craze and decided to throw everything they had at the wall. The result was the Rebel Machine, AMC's most powerful vehicle, period. A 390 cubic inch V8, producing 340 horsepower, pushed this squared-off two-door through the quarter mile in the mid-14s. That was competitive with anything from the Big Three in its price range. With only about 2,500 built, the Rebel Machine is genuinely rare, yet it remains surprisingly overlooked. The early cars came in a patriotic red, white, and blue color scheme that was as subtle as a fireworks display. Later production cars were available in any AMC color, but it was those early screamers that defined the car's personality. The machine package included a ram air hood scoop, a hood-mounted tachometer, visible through the windshield, heavy-duty suspension, and power front disc brakes. AMC marketed it with the tagline that it was the machine for people who did not want to drive ordinary cars. Ironic, then, that ordinary is exactly how history has treated this genuinely exceptional muscle car. Number 10, 1971 Pontiac GT37. While Pontiac's GTO gets all the glory as the car that started the muscle car revolution, the GT37 was the division's budget performance offering that almost nobody remembers. Based on the compact T37, it was Pontiac's attempt to create an affordable entry-level muscle car for younger buyers who could not afford a GTO or a Firebird. It came standard with a 350 cubic inch V8, but the real trick was checking the L75 option box, which dropped in a 455 cubic inch big block. Yes, a 455 in a compact Pontiac. The result was a lightweight car with way more engine than it probably should have had. Production numbers were tiny, with the big block versions being especially scarce. The GT37 was only offered for 2 model years, 1970 and 1971, before Pontiac pulled the plug. Today, the very few surviving L75 units command 6-figure sums at auction. But most people have never even heard of the car. It is the forgotten little brother of one of America's most famous muscle car families. Number 9, 1970, Dodge Coronet R/T 426 Hemi Convertible. The Dodge Coronet RT was not exactly rare on its own. Plenty of people bought and owned them throughout the late 60s and early 70s. But the 1970 Coronet RT with the 426 Hemi and a convertible top is one of the rarest specification combinations of any mass-produced muscle car in history. Only 296 Coronet RTs left the factory as convertibles that year. Of those, just 2 came with the legendary Hemi engine. One was painted in the eye-popping sublime green. The other wore the ultra-rare dark tan metallic. The Coronet RT featured the Ram Charger-style twin-scoop induction hood, a rear bumblebee stripe, and faux scoops ahead of the rear wheel arches. The base engine was the formidable 440 Magnum 4-barrel, rated at 375 horsepower. Stepping up to the Hemi or the 446-pack turned the Coronet into a genuine drag strip weapon, but it was also a comfortable cruiser with a well-appointed interior. Count yourself genuinely lucky if you ever see one of these in person. Number 8, 1973 Pontiac Firebird Formula S D455. By 1973, most automakers had surrendered to emissions regulations and the incoming energy crisis, not Pontiac. Their engineers managed to squeeze out one last legitimate performance car in the form of the Firebird Formula S D455. The SD stood for Super Duty, and it was not just marketing fluff. This was a purpose-built performance engine with reinforced block webbing, forged pistons, a radical camshaft, and free-flowing exhaust headers. It was conservatively rated at 290 net horsepower, but real-world output was significantly higher. The SD455 was Pontiac's final defiant gesture against the forces that were killing muscle cars. Production numbers were extremely limited because the engine was expensive to build, and most buyers were fleeing towards smaller, more fuel-efficient cars. The Formula version is particularly scarce because most SD455 engines ended up in the flashier Trans Am. Today, the Formula SD455 is one of the most sought-after Pontiacs among serious collectors, a reminder that at least one manufacturer refused to go quietly. Number 7, 1971 AMC Matador Machine 401. When people think of AMC performance, the Javelin usually comes to mind first, but the Matador machine deserves its own spotlight. This was AMC's mid-size muscle entry, and in 1971, you could get it with the 401 cubic inch V8, producing 330 horsepower. The Matador machine was far rarer and far more forgotten than even the Rebel machine that preceded it. Best estimates suggest only a few hundred were built with the 401 and the full performance package. AMC only moved about 50 total units of the Matador machine in 1971, which is an astonishingly low number, even by the standards of the dying muscle car era. By this point, most manufacturers were backing away from performance entirely, but AMC was still swinging for the fences. The Matador machine had a bold appearance with racing stripes, a functional hood scoop, and upgraded suspension. It was one of AMC's last big performance-oriented V8s at a time when the rest of Detroit had essentially given up. For enthusiasts who want something genuinely different and impossibly rare, the Matador machine is the ultimate deep cut. Number 6. 1970 Oldsmobile 442 W30. The Oldsmobile 442 always lived in the shadow of the Chevelle SS and Pontiac GTO within the GM family. That is a shame, because the W30 package turned the 442 into an absolute animal. The 1970 W30 came with a 455 cubic inch V8 featuring special cylinder heads, a hotter camshaft, and an aggressive tuning setup. It was rated at 370 horsepower, but was almost certainly underrated from the factory. Period road tests showed it running deep into the 13-second range in the quarter mile. The W30 package also included a fiberglass inner fender air induction system that force-fed cold air directly to the carburetor, giving it a genuine ram air advantage. Oldsmobile offered a smoother ride and a reputation for durability that many competitors could not match. But none of that mattered when shoppers walked into a GM dealer and headed straight for the Chevrolet or Pontiac section. The 442 W30 is finally being recognized by collectors as one of the finest GM muscle cars ever produced, but for decades it was the afterthought of the A-body wars. Number 5. 1971 Pontiac GTO Judge Convertible Factory. GTO Judges of any variety are scarce these days, but the convertible models are an especially rare breed. Pontiac built just 17 GTO Judge convertibles in 1971, and each one of those is accounted for among collectors today. The Judge package added bold graphics, a rear spoiler, rally two wheels, and the choice of ram air engines. In convertible form, with the top down and that massive hood scoop staring at the sky, the GTO Judge was one of the most visually dramatic muscle cars ever created. But by 1971, the Judge was on its last legs. Insurance costs had scared away younger buyers, emissions regulations were strangling power output, and the muscle car market was collapsing. Pontiac discontinued the Judge after that model year. Those 17 convertibles represent the absolute end of a legendary lineage that started back in 1964 when the GTO essentially invented the muscle car segment. Today, a documented 1971 GTO Judge convertible is one of the most valuable American muscle cars in existence, a time capsule from the very last days of the Golden Age. Number 4, 1970 Ford Torino Cobra 429. The Ford Torino Cobra is one of the most criminally underrated muscle cars of the entire Golden Age, and it is strange to say that about a car from the high-profile Ford Motor Company. But the Mustang stole all the oxygen. By 1970, Ford was synonymous with pony cars, not muscle cars, and those were two very distinct markets. The Torino Cobra featured a 429 Cobra Jet V8, producing 370 horsepower. With the optional drag pack, you got the Super Cobra Jet with 375 horsepower, solid lifters, and a forged bottom end. The 1970 Torino received a complete redesign with aggressive new styling that was among the best-looking of any muscle car that year. It dominated NASCAR, it was immortalized in a Clint Eastwood movie, and yet it remains largely unknown to casual enthusiasts. The Torino Cobra offered genuine big block muscle at a competitive price, with handling and braking that many rivals could not touch. If you want a legitimate 429 muscle car without paying Mustang boss money, the Torino Cobra is your answer. Number 3, 1971 GMC Sprint SP 454. People know GMC for trucks, not muscle cars. But the Sprint SP was essentially a rebadged El Camino built by GMC, and in 1971 you could get one with the LS5 454 big block V8. This was a factory-built muscle car so rare that even seasoned collectors argue over how many were ever made. GMC only produced around 7,000 Sprints per year across all configurations, with the big block versions being a tiny fraction of that total. In the early years, the 454 made around 365 horsepower before emission standards brought that down to 270 by 1972 and 245 by 1973. Here is the kicker. While a 454 El Camino commands serious collector money today, the nearly identical GMC Sprint SP with the same engine costs roughly half the price. A good 1971 Sprint SP with the LS5 will cost around $22,800, according to Hagerty. The El Camino gets all the nostalgia and the pop culture references. The Sprint gets a discount for wearing the wrong badge. Number 2, 1970 Chrysler 300 Hurst Convertible. If you asked even the most knowledgeable muscle car expert what the rarest regular production muscle car of the Golden Age was, most would get it wrong. Some might guess the '67 Shelby GT 500 Super Snake. Others might suggest the '69 Corvette ZL1 Convertible. But the correct answer is the 1970 Chrysler 300 Hurst Convertible. Exactly one was ever made. This was the second collaboration between George Hurst and a major automaker, and this time he chose Chrysler instead of Oldsmobile. The 300 Hurst was based on Chrysler's full-size platform and packed the 440 TNT V8 as its standard engine, with the option for even more power. The sole convertible version is essentially a one-of-one factory muscle car, making it the rarest of the rare. The hardtop versions were produced in slightly larger numbers, but the convertible stands alone in automotive history. It combines the luxury of a full-size Chrysler with genuine muscle car credentials, a combination that almost nobody thought to order. Finding one is not difficult. There is literally only one, and its whereabouts are well documented among the collector community. Number 1, 1970 Plymouth Hemi Cuda Convertible. This is the car that tops virtually every muscle car rarity list, and for good reason. The 1970 Plymouth Hemi Cuda Convertible is the holy grail of American muscle, the single most valuable and sought-after production car from the entire golden era. Plymouth offered the Cuda with the legendary 426 Hemi engine, rated at 425 horsepower. In convertible form, with no roof to muffle that thunderous exhaust note, it was an experience that bordered on religious. But here is the problem. In 1970, insurance costs for a Hemi-powered car were absolutely astronomical. Adding a convertible top made it even worse. Most buyers either could not afford the insurance or simply did not see the point in paying the premium. The result was absurdly low production numbers. Depending on the source, somewhere between 9 and 14 Hemi Cuda convertibles were built for 1970. Today, verified examples have sold at auction for upwards of $3.5 million, with one fetching over $4 million. It is the ultimate expression of everything the muscle car era represented. Raw, unapologetic power, wrapped in drop-top freedom, built in numbers so small that most of us will never see one outside of a photograph. And that is exactly why we want it back more than any other car on this list. And there you have it. 20 forgotten muscle cars from the 1970s that we desperately want back on the road. From budget screamers like the Pontiac GT37 to million-dollar unicorns like the Hemi Cuda Convertible, the 70s were full of incredible machines that history left behind. Which one of these would you bring back if you could? Drop your pick in the comment section below. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into muscle car history, go ahead and hit like, subscribe, and tap that notification bell so you do not miss our next countdown. Thanks for watching, and we will see you next time.